welcome to FO Talks. I'm Anton Schabel, Assistant Editor and Chief of Staff to the Editor-in-Chief of Fair Observer. With me is Christopher Roper-Schell, a book editor and Capitol Hill veteran turned policy advisor. He's also a contributing editor at Fair Observer. Welcome, Christopher.
How's it going, Anton? Good to see you.
It's good to see you again as well. Our topic for today, make sense of surging illegal immigration at the U.S.-Mexico border. In 2021, the number of migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border skyrocketed. Illegal entries leapt from tens of thousands to the hundreds of thousands and have remained at record levels ever since. December 2023 set a new record with U.S. Border Patrol apprehending 225,000 persons in the month. The tide is not likely to end anytime soon. Tell us, Christopher, who are these people and where are they coming from?
Yeah, they're coming from pretty much everywhere. I think there are a couple of things we should get out of the way up front. So there are basically four ways to come over here. There's legally, you won a visa lottery, you have a green card, something like that. Mm-hmm. You can come here illegally, which is, you just show up and you get past the border. There is also a parole system. We'll get into this more, which is legal but limited in terms of how long you can stay, but seemingly unlimited in the number of people who have been permitted to use this option. And then lastly, there is asylum. Asylum is a fairly lax standard. You come in and you say the standard is merely a credible fear in your home country. So what we'll probably focus on more is not the purely illegal and not the legal. We'll talk about the asylum and the parole issues.
So it's a bit more than just illegal immigrants. Then it's a legal gray area, you're saying.
It is, and we're going to get more into this gray area. I also want to say up front that the asylum and parole means by which you can get into the country are legal, but they have been blown out of disproportion. I mean, you can drive a Mack truck through these things the way the Biden administration has administered these programs. Who are these people? To get back...
No, continue.
To get back to your original question, who are these people? Everyone from everywhere on a much larger scale. Indeed, a lot of folks are from south of the border, but we've seen an uptick in Chinese and Indian immigrants. Obviously, we've had a lot of Ukrainians of late. We have Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela are kind of their unique set in terms of parole. And we'll discuss that, I assume, a little bit later. I don't want to bog this down too much. More of everyone is the basic answer.
Yeah, so it's not just Latin Americans, which might be the common assumption. We have a lot of people, suppose, flying into Mexico and then making the trek on foot from there.
They do, yeah. It's a treacherous trek. There are. One of the misconceptions is that for a long time, most of the people who were here illegally actually flew in or came in on a visitor's visa. I don't know if that's still true, but I sort of think in the back of my mind it's probably not. But a lot of people who are in the U.S. illegally arrived here legally. So it's not all just these treacherous things we see on the news.
Right. Let's talk a bit more about that. Why is the border so porous? Is the Border Patrol doing its job? Do we have a large number of people who fall into the simply illegal category, like you described? Or is the case a bit more complicated?
I think the case is more complicated.
It's always more complicated.
It always is. The border is porous for a variety of reasons. One, it's extremely long. People forget how corrugated that border is. We're talking about 2,000 miles. Now, if you pull up your book of geography, or as everyone does now on your phone, if you took all of those corrugations and you stretched it as a line, and you took it from the southwest tip of California, where in the west it first meets Mexico, and you just stretch that out like a string, you get to Chicago. I don't know how
Mhm.
many people are familiar with that distance, but if they're looking on their phones, they'll see that's an incredibly long stretch. There are so many people and so many places where they can get in that it is by nature of the length of it difficult to watch every square inch of it. Is Customs and Border CBP, are they doing their job? Absolutely. They are inundated. They really just can't handle this wild volume of immigrants, which vastly surpasses the number of people we have ever had. We've hit some all-time highs in recent months. So people are doing their jobs. It is just the flood that makes it impossible to address the problem.
What might be behind this flood increasing so much in recent years? Poverty, war are not new things, I'm sure.
Right. There aren't more dictators in South America, or despots, or problems. Let's just broaden it to that. Problems in the
Mhm.
world. Uh, Republicans like to focus on the sort of pull factors. What is making this trip so enticing? Democrats like to talk about the push factors. What are people leaving, and why is it so bad?
Mhm.
In terms of the pull factors, Joe Biden, right off the bat, said that he was right off the bat he actually eliminated a lot of the former Trump provisions. He paused nearly all deportations. He vowed to end most of the Trump practices, and as a candidate, he said, and I quote, "If you want to flee and you are fleeing oppression, you should come." Now, significantly, oppression is not a category the U.S. recognizes in immigration. So Biden set the tone right off the bat. And with any number of additional interviews, speeches, debate points, he emphasized that he was going to be lighter on the border. His party typically likes a less restrictive border.
Mhm.
Republicans typically like a more restrictive border. So the pull factors Republicans would cite is you have made this enticing, and you've effectively suggested it's going to be easy. On the other hand, Democrats will cite the push factors. You may recall Kamala Harris went down and tried to find the root causes, which didn't produce much in the way of a reduction in illegal immigration. So the border is being crushed in many ways because President Biden sent the signal that the old bad days of Trump are over. Come on up. Now, I don't want to be unfair. There were two other elements at play. Donald Trump used both Title 42 and the Remain in Mexico policy. And here's where it gets a little bit muddy. The Remain in Mexico policy said, if you are coming to America, you have to stay in Mexico as we adjudicate your claim. Title 42 was a different creature. Title 42 was a COVID policy that said for healthcare
Mhm.
reasons, we are going to tell you that the border is effectively closed. Don't come over here. Trump also had certain numerical points, only so many asylum seekers per day. Biden has removed those caps.
See, now you mentioned COVID. That complicates things, to overuse the word, a little bit more, because the transition from the COVID period into the post-COVID period and the transition from Trump to Biden, in some respects, happen around the same time. How, I'm not asking you to put a number on it, of course, but do you think that political factors or physical factors might be playing a greater role here?
So I think one of the things to which you're alluding is Title 42, which was a COVID measure. Obviously,
Right.
COVID, in terms of the public emergency, has subsided. But it's worthwhile to keep in mind that Title 42 as an American policy didn't
Mhm.
end until May of 2023. So there was something else going on
Right.
well prior to that led to these significant increases in illegal and quasi illegal immigration. There was an enticement, so to speak. Now, are there political factors? Of course. For a long time, Democrats have preferred to keep a more open border. Part of this goes back to the days when, part of it is that Democrats feel there are humanitarian reasons to do this. The
Certainly.
political set would say, yes, we also think they will be permanent Democrats, that they will be amenable to our policies and that these are potential voters. For cultural reasons, I've never believed that argument. I've always thought they would be natural allies with the Republican Party. Indeed, I think we're seeing some of that bear out, but there are always politics involved.
As much as we might prefer our leaders to make things from a disinterested position of pure rationality, it wouldn't be very realistic to expect that, would it?
Yeah, and if you want to go into it, and we can talk about the various bills that have been proposed in the last, call it 2 decades, and why they haven't passed. The respective parties of Democrats and Republicans at various times have liked the issue.
Mm-hmm.
They are not terribly interested in fixing the problem because they think it resonates with their base and will propel them into office. So there are indeed a lot of political reasons to either embrace this issue or keep it at bay.
Right. So let's talk about Washington's changing policy on immigration then. In 1924, we established the infamous Immigration Act, which established a quota system discriminating on the basis of national origin, mostly to keep supposedly undesirable immigrants from East Asia out and to keep America's influx of immigrants mostly European. During the civil rights period in the 1960s, Americans turned against that, and we saw the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which abolished this system and instead sought to discriminate on the basis of things like job skills or professional qualifications, as well as family relationship to existing American citizens. In later decades, we've seen a lot of reforms that were proposed but not implemented. Can you tell us about some of them? For example, the 2005 McCain-Kennedy bill.
Yeah, so the McCain-Kennedy bill had Republicans would say it had an amnesty provision. You
Mhm.
pay $1,500 and you can stay. And Republicans said, now this is going back to those push and pull measures. Republicans said, hey, you're creating a bad incentive. You're saying if you break the law, pay $1,500 and you're good. And they felt this was a bad incentive. If memory serves, and that's a long time back for me, there might have been some other provisions that had to do with, indeed, allowing people to stay who were here illegally. That's usually kind of the deal. The Democrats want to ensure certain people get to stay permanently, and Republicans want to reduce the flow at the border. There's another issue there And that is Republicans typically like more high skilled workers, Democrats like more low skilled workers. And I always tell my friends, everyone knows the solution. The answer is to legalize more of both. But at different times, the two parties have thought that they had the upper hand. Now, fast forward in 2007, there was a deal, and no less than then Senator Barack Obama played a role in putting poison pills into a deal that was out there that died. In 2013, there was another deal that was afoot. Democrats poisoned that one. Okay, so I've given you sort of the dirty laundry of the Democrats, but that's not to say Republicans are absolved. In 2018, there was another deal afoot, and Republicans put the kibosh on that. And the interesting thing about what we're discussing in today's deal is it really requires less of Republicans. There are no components that offer amnesty for what everyone talks about right now, the dreamers, the young people who were brought here as children and are here and are likely to stay here. It is purely a deal about reducing the flow. Where they differ is Biden seems chiefly interested in providing money so that we can process people in a more efficient manner. And Republicans say, no, we're not looking to provide more processing power. We want to reduce the flow. I don't know if this deal has a shot. The original thinking was, okay, Republicans want greater border security and fewer immigrants, less unabated immigration from the southern border. And Democrats, and to be fair, a lot of Republicans want aid for Ukraine and Israel. So it was originally thought we tether these two together and we muddle through a deal that way. Well, the House has recently said, and to be fair, Republicans have said, never mind. James Lankford in the Senate, who was not happy and actually used the term, the House Republicans saying never mind, is not happy about it. He's been working on a deal. But that's kind of where we stand now. And I also want to mention that at this point, we don't really know what the House and the Senate bills offer. We just know the lines of battle. And we know that while Democrats are okay with altering some of the asylum provisions, the credible fear standard, for example, they are less amenable to altering parole, which we talked about earlier.
So a little more clear what's not in this current bill than what is in the current bill. So we're not talking about amnesty like John McCain was talking about back in 2005. We are not tinkering with parole. I suppose my question would be, what is it about the law as it stands now that would need changing? I know a lot of Republicans have accused the president of not enforcing laws that are already on the books, not using the authority that he already has. Is there justice to those claims?
Republicans would say the problem is that he's overusing an authority he has. So parole was typically for limited circumstances. And we've seen the parole offerings increase by at least an order of magnitude. And I'm being pretty generous to Democrats. In fact, we've seen
Before you go on, let me ask, what would those circumstances be in a general case?
In the past, it would be if people of foreign origin needed medical care, if they, if we needed somebody for a witness at trial. It was typically for people who were performing a service of great value to the country, or there was an immediate humanitarian need. So let's say I filed all the paperwork, but I'm going to get killed tomorrow. I don't have time for the bureaucracy to work it through. you might get parole for that. This is not to say that these were infinitesimal numbers, but they were rather infinitesimal relative to what we're seeing now.
I see. So, you're no, is it you're saying that the Biden administration has repurposed this into something it was not intended to be?
I'm saying what I said before. You could drive a Mack truck through these provisions that were originally intended for very specific and nuanced purposes. The Biden has opened this up wholesale for Nicaragua, Cuba, Argentina, leading a couple of country or two out. But we're talking about a massive increase. And it was not intended to be a wholesale option. Now, there has been a pretty substantial uptick in both Afghan citizens and Ukrainians. I think Republicans are a little bit more understanding of those. A lot of these Afghans who are fleeing worked with the U.S. military, and we kind of left them high and dry. So they have adjusted parole to accommodate them, as well as Ukrainians trying to get out. Interestingly, parole requires, it's only good for a year or two, and then you have to go back to your country of origin. So this has to be extended. The administration and others have talked about extending parole for Afghan citizens and Ukrainian citizens, and that has stuck. In terms of the others, the concern is that they will, as so many others who are here under the other non-illegal means of coming in, asylum and parole, they tend to disappear in the ether. And the concern is that if we parole all of these people, they'll probably disappear into the ether as well. We don't know much about them. One final point on that. In some places, the court backlog on asylum claims is up to 10 years. Mm-hmm. We know that there is a very low compliance rate with these asylum court dates. So that's another concern.
So it's not just as simple as you get your 12 months, try to establish some kind of more permanent residency, and then hop back home and try again. There's frayed ends at the system.
Well, yeah, and what Republicans also want is to prevent people who came here on humanitarian parole from switching to asylum. You came here for kind of one of the others, they're thinking, and we don't want to change this into a whirligig of whatever's the best option. I was here for 2 years. Wait a second. Now I claim there's a credible fear and the backlog is 10 years. That's fairly extreme, but let's say it's 5 years. And okay, now you're going to be around for 5 years, and then you'll probably disappear after that. And this is not to say I fault anyone for, wandering off and saying, I don't want to risk it. I'm just saying it creates a problem for America. It's very unstructured. And frankly, it's very unfair to those who came here on either the visa lottery or green cards or other means. You're a chump. Why did you even do that? You could have come here regardless.
And that plays into, as you were saying before, the misconception that immigrants are going to turn into Democrat voters, because they don't always. There are a lot of people who are they have their feathers ruffled at seeing others get in, through the back door while they waited for their own lottery for years.
Yes. And we are seeing the migration of a lot of Hispanic voters who Trump performed surprisingly well in the last election. He lost. Well, some Republicans would say he didn't, but he lost the election. He's not president right now, and he performed surprisingly well with Hispanic voters, particularly along. And this is interesting. The southern edge of Texas, right there on the border, where you have quite a few Hispanics those were solidly blue districts in many cases that went red. And the Democratic pollsters, I read, and folks I talk to kind of went, whoa, this is a big problem. And to the point I was making earlier, I think culturally they're more aligned. You're talking about people from often very devout and Christian backgrounds who are fleeing big government. And they show up and they say, well, I don't necessarily agree with some of the social policies of Democrats. I also do not agree that government is a great solution to everything. Look at Cubans in Florida, man. The Cubans in Florida vote Republican. They're solid. Those first and second generation Cubans, they're carrying Florida from purple to red.
Well, a Cuban is not a Mexican, and a Mexican is not a Colombian. And Latin America has its own diverse and very long political and religious history. Both the Latin American left and the Latin American right have a long history with Catholicism. It's not as automatic where if I am a fervent Christian, that means that I'm going to be on the right wing, as we might sometimes assume in the United States. That seems to be the story. There's always more to it.
And I'll say something you're not supposed to say. Europe has a significant population that has with it a very different background. They're largely secular, but they have a devout or fairly devout Muslim population moving in. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say, I don't care if you're Muslim or Christian or whatever. I'm just saying that if you are Christian and you come to this nation, there are a whole lot of Christians. And I think that culturally, there is greater resonance. I think sometimes the historically Christian European nations are having a greater struggle with understanding some of the people who are moving in. And once again, I really don't care if you're Muslim or Christian, but the assimilation problem is well known in Europe.
There was a time in the United States where it wouldn't have mattered very much if you were Christian as long as you weren't Protestant. But attitudes change. So, you mentioned Texas. Let's talk a bit more about Texas. Greg Abbott has been making a lot of noise lately, the Republican governor of the most extensive and I believe most populous Republican state in the Union. He, for a few years now, has been busing tens of thousands of migrants to Democrat-run cities across the country in a more or less political ploy to bring attention to the issue, which Democrats might not want to shine as harsh of a light on. He's shining a harsher light than ever now. As far as I am aware, at time of recording, Texas State Militia and Border Patrol are still engaged in a standoff near Shelby Park, which is on the Texas-Mexico border. 2 days ago, Greg Abbott tweeted that he was declaring Texas in a state of invasion and invoking Texas's constitutional right to defend itself with the force of arms, with or without the federal government's help. And 25 Republican state governors signed a statement supporting him. How do you think that this situation is likely to resolve?
It's very difficult. So, was it a stunt or was it just entirely fair? Busing and flying a variety of immigrants to northern cities and a lot of times progressive cities, a lot of sanctuary cities. Martha's Vineyard, that was obviously a stunt. Many of you out there know Martha's Vineyard is a very Tony spot. and that was intended to ruffle some feathers. Um,
Hmm.
it's not necessarily a stunt entirely because Texas cannot handle the numbers of people who are coming across the border. So it's not like every year Texas can absorb 2 million people. So to a degree, they have to spread them out. They have to go elsewhere.
Hmm.
The political genius of this was that he finally made it the problem of northern states that heretofore had always said, oh, it's not that bad. And now they're crying uncle. You have Eric Adams in New York City, who has been as forceful as he can without upsetting the apple cart too much. However, he did say this will destroy New York City. He
Hmm.
has massive budget holes that he's having a hard time plugging. Honestly, what do you think Texans have been doing for years and years and years? They've had budget holes, they've had problems. And with this influx, A, you have to move, the immigrants somewhere. And B, sorry, not sorry. This is what we've been dealing with forever. Apparently, you're just finding out about it. And for years, you've said, oh, you're just being mean. You're locking up kids. You hate black and brown people. Well, how long can you drink from a fire hose? So Texas has multiple lawsuits against the government. I don't know what the likelihood is that they're going to prevail. However, Texas seems to be losing on their argument for putting up razor wire. What I can tell you is, just in terms of politics and an election year, it's not going to be a good look for the administration when federal officials are at the southern border clipping razor wire. And frankly, I think the Republicans know this. It's kind of a win-win for them. Either we get to do something to attempt to reduce the flow, or we get punished by the feds, and this is going to make Biden look even weaker than he already is on immigration. And I think part of the problem Biden has is this thing is snowballed. Had he done something a while ago, had he not made any number of statements encouraging people to come to the border, then I think he would have some credibility on the border issue. He's now saying, well, I need this power from Congress and I'll do this on day one. But that's a change in tune and a decided one. Now, some Democrats say, okay, Republicans are going to have to own this issue if they don't come to a deal. And frankly, it's a pretty good deal, or at least a whole lot better than anything they've ever had. But I think Biden kind of owns the issue because he's the guy there. Everyone can compare the Trump numbers with Biden numbers. Everyone can compare the media coverage to how it was back then. And everyone knows, look, what is Trump's issue? Build the wall. So the idea that Biden getting tough now, quote unquote, on immigration is going to, and that Republicans reject any sort of bill is going to redound to Biden's benefit, I think is a tough row to hoe. And Trump quite obviously knows this. And he is saying he wants a perfect deal. The flip side to that is right now, Democrats are ready to make a deal.
Easy to ask for a perfect deal. uh, I might point out when you're not the one who's in charge, Mister. I have my doubts when Mister I would solve Russia and Ukraine in 24 hours suggests a perfect deal for anything. But please continue.
It's going to be beautiful. Um, Look, if let's take this past the election. Democrats are ready to deal right now, and they're not asking for any sort of dreamer.
We've been talking about this for a while. I feels like we've just scratched the surface of so many aspects of the situation. Uh, and necessarily we'd have to. You could write several books about this. And I'd read them too. But the general image that seems to be coming out of this is that we've got deadlock everywhere. We've got deadlock in the Senate On the immigration reform bill, we've got deadlock in the House on a different version of the immigration reform bill. We've got deadlock in Shelby Park with Texas and federal agents not budging. We have a White House that seems not to know where to go from here. And maybe this will be the situation for the rest of 2024. To me, it looks like we might not see things shake up until the presidential election. What things will look like then, I'll have to ask you. So please, Christopher, tell me, what is your vision of what a second Biden administration's handling of the border might look like? And what is your impression of what a second Trump administration's handling might look like?
Yeah, the odd thing is, this may be the best moment for a deal that does something without any other bells and whistles or issues beyond the original goal to tie aid, although that seems done and dusted. Mm-hmm. Right now, Biden is getting crushed in the polls on his immigration handling. He's down, I've seen all kinds of different polls, but let's call it 30 points relative to Trump on this issue. Democratic pollsters are freaking out. They're saying Biden has no credibility on actually doing anything. The American public is furious, and he's going to get hit at the polls on this. So the Democrats are asking in return for less than they've ever asked in any immigration bill. Republicans decidedly have the upper hand here. However, Trump wants to run on the issue. He thinks that border chaos that cripples Biden in the polls on at least that issue is good for him. And so he is quite keen to capitalize on that.
So there's, to some extent, the deadlock in Congress is of the Republicans, not if not creation, at least encouragement, is because it benefits them.
I think Trump has done some tweets or whatever he does when he said, he only wants a perfect bill. He said this is a good deal only for Democrats, all of that. And I'm not so sure that's the case. I think politically, and both Democrats have done this. We went through, the mid-aughts and the teens of Democrats liking the issue. Well, Republicans are now playing the same game, and they like the issue, and Biden gets beat up in the polls over this. I think, to be honest, most Republicans very much are in favor of a closed border, and Democrats are generally more open to a relatively porous border, though even they recognize this is not good for their president, or for the president, and this is not good for the party. The kicker to all of this is that were Trump to win, Democrats would not be interested in a deal. Biden would be out of office. They are naturally inclined toward a less restrictive border. And if Biden wins, they would not offer the deal they're offering now because they wouldn't be in such political peril. They would want to go back and maybe legalize the Dreamers or have a variety of other requirements. So I don't know you get this deal again.
Even the presidential election then isn't likely to shake things up as much because the incentives on both sides encourage a return to stasis post-November.
I think it encourages a return to the deals of yore. This is a fairly unfettered deal. As I said before, we don't know what's in these bills. Democrats are resistant on the parole issue, which is a big deal. 1 million people. This is one that Republicans will really want to go to the mat for, and I understand why. To change amnesty without changing parole is not great. But Biden has shifted from saying, I just want a whole bunch of money, to basically legitimize this and to streamline and to take all comers, but make sure that we get them through the system faster, to, okay, there will have to be something restrictive about these provisions. And that is something in my 20 years of playing, being on Hill and whatnot, I have not seen this before, this sort of opportunity.
We have just a few months more to find out, I suppose.
Yeah.
For now, both bills are still alive in each house. Alive-ish, technically alive.
But not alive, wounded, sir, but dead. Maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, and we'll have to wait and see. For now,
we will.
Thank you, Christopher, for helping us make sense of this situation.
Absolutely. Anton, you're a rock star. I appreciate you, buddy.
Have a very good evening.
You too. Cheers, mate.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.